What happened to morality in the world of academia? A question on many people's minds today. How can intelligent people, educated, academics, professionals, lose their moral compass, not be able to see the clear line between right and wrong, good and evil? Everybody in this world is biased. Everybody. We all have our biases, our subjectivity, our prejudices. But one of the signs of intelligence is that you recognize that you're prejudiced. You acknowledge it. Remember the fellow that told me, he was talking to me about some issues he was struggling with, and he felt he had done everything possible, so there must be some other problem, blaming someone else. So I asked him, do you have any blind spots? And his response was, yes, but I know where they are. Then it's not a blind spot. So that's the first sign of true open-minded intelligence. So what happened? How are people so convinced of certain truths that completely blur the lines of what is right and what is wrong? Bertrand Russell, the great philosopher, thinker, moralist, professor of ethics, purportedly, some say it's urban legend, but this is how the story goes, that he once behaved unethically, and the ethics committee of his university called him in and said, Dr. Russell, how could you behave unethically? You teach ethics. And without missing a beat, he responded, I also teach mathematics, and I'm not a triangle. Which captures a fundamental point that many academics actually are proud of. I'm an objective observer. Don't look at me. Look at what I teach. I am not what I teach, and what I teach is not necessarily who I am. I'm telling you objective truth. That has always been the approach of so-called many thinkers. Is that even true? Is our personal life at all completely disconnected? Besides the fact that today with quantum mechanics we know the observer affects the phenomenon, so it could very well be that our behavior does affect the very atoms and subatomic particles around us, but let's not go there. Let's contrast what Russell said with Maimonides. Maimonides writes, what is the litmus test of a wise person? He says it's not his brilliance, not oratory skills, his ability to make a good argument, his communications, his sharp mind. What is the litmus test of a wise person? How he behaves, how he talks, how he eats, how he drinks, how he sleeps, how he walks, how he interacts with other people. In other words, true intelligence isn't just brain power. Computers have brain power, but they don't have any emotional intelligence. You can have machines that can crunch data much better than any human mind, but there's no heart. There's no empathy. Is empathy not part of human reality? So if a person is brilliant, but they cannot feel, they cannot express love, is there something lacking? You'll say, well, second, what does it have to do with their minds? Their minds are brilliant. The computer can give you perfect numbers even if it has no heart. But how about that whole dimension of life that is about relationships? I always was drawn to that line. I'm not sure who coined it. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So therefore, if you go into worship, that type of dissonance and detachment between the triangle and you, between what you teach ethics and your own ethical behavior, obviously academia then is rendered not necessarily synonymous with ethics, which therefore is not a surprise that you could have found some of the best doctors and scientists in Nazi Germany who did the most unethical things and experiments on innocent people in the name of academia. I'm detached. In other words, academia is not the place to look for morality based on this Russell premise. Based on Maimonides' premise, absolutely. This doesn't mean we're perfect, but it means what do we aspire to? Are we going to be proud and laud the fact that I am not what I teach, and what I teach I am not? What I teach is not who I am, or who I am is not what I teach? Or we say, listen, we're all human beings. Do I live up to everything I teach? We're humans, but I aspire to. I don't try to be proud of the fact, don't look at me. I'm an objective observer. There's no one that's an objective observer. Everyone has interest. It may not be always overt interest, meaning you're getting money to laud or to promote a particular ideology. But your own personal interests get in the way. I remember once asking a scientist, or a few scientists that I know, I said, okay, you dismiss religious thinkers, religious people as being biased. They have their subjective, their faith. You call it a crutch, desperation. They turn to God. You don't need God. You have everything is in your rational mind. That's how you calculate it all. So you dismiss religious people. They're not objective. But I'm a scientist. I'm objective. I'm an academic. Let me ask you something, I say. It could be that you have vested interest in the result that there is no God. What's my interest? The interest is because then you're not accountable. You're not responsible to anyone. You don't have to live an ethical life. Who do you answer to? Your own conscience. At least acknowledge that you have an interest. So I don't know if you should recuse yourself, but don't say that you're suddenly so objective. Everyone has interest. Yes, it could be a religious person grew up, a person of faith in a home, and you could say they were programmed that way. They're brainwashed, if you wish, which itself is condescending because there are quite a few people of faith that are very open-minded and very intelligent. But let us say they have their biases, but so do you. You also have your interest. No scientist I ever spoke to was ready to acknowledge that. No. That's why it's not a problem for someone to say this building cannot exist without an architect. A book cannot exist without an author. A piece of art cannot exist without an artist. Beautiful music cannot exist without a composer. But when it comes to the universe, which is more eloquent and more poetic and more brilliant than all the above, than all the architecture and poetry and art and music, no, who says there's a creator? I always wondered, why doesn't the same logic apply? Because I'll tell you why. That there's a creator of music or a book, why not? There's no skin off my back. But if there's a God, then maybe I have to ask, why am I here? Am I accountable? Again, it has implications. Now, if someone told you that the architect, every time you walk into a certain building, you have to pay royalties, you'll start wondering also. You'll say, 1 second, who owns this building? So self-interest affects us all, let's be honest. And then I discovered something Aldous Huxley wrote. I'm just paraphrasing. But he writes, he says, I want to begin by saying, before I get into my agnostic and the case I make against God or the doubts of whether there are a God, I need to say one thing. I begin with a bias. I don't want to have a God in my life, especially in the area of sexuality. I don't want someone telling me what to do. And now I'll tell you my arguments. I was actually impressed. He's honest. So when we see the lines blurred, or even worse, in the world of academia, don't worship academia. Just like don't worship computers. Yes, they may be intelligent, certain academics in their fields, not taking away from their contributions. But they are not the arbiters of truth. You could say they're part of the human effort to try to find truth in their field. But maybe they know nothing about what's right and wrong. And if they are proud of the fact that they want to be detached, in other words, that science and wisdom and intelligence is essentially not unethical, not ethical, but amoral, meaning it's neutral, that's what they are proud of, so be it. But know that's not where you're going to find morality. There can be very academics that are very moral and very ethical, but you see others that are not. So you can say it's amoral, which can either become immoral or become very moral. I would like to believe that the search for truth, which includes morality and ethics and what is right and wrong, also belongs in the world of academia. It's also part of understanding the truth of existence. What's right, what's wrong? No one's going to argue that there are certain foods that are toxic, poison can kill you, and others that are healthy and nourishing. You may have a debate about certain foods one way or the other, but there are certain rights and wrongs. There are certain things that for sure have been proven to be dangerous. The same is with human behavior. There are dangerous ideas, and a good academic should be able to distinguish. The problem is, in our world, we worship academics as if they are the wisest. They may be wise in their brains, but the emotional intelligence that's necessary, life itself. One of the Supreme Court justices in the early 60s, I believe, said, when they asked him about pornography, how do you define it? How don't you? He says, I can't define it, but we know when it is. When I see it, I know it is. It's obscene. There are certain things you may not be able to point your finger, but you know something's wrong. So when we see the confusion out there, let's just define things. Academics are also human beings, and they can have distortions and perhaps even greater distortions. Sometimes the smartest people have the deepest distortions because they know how to cover their tracks. And their distortions are also now justified, rationalized. Someone that has a distortion doesn't have a rationale. They could say, okay, I made a mistake, or I was lazy, or I was reckless, or so on, something like that. But a person who dresses it up in arguments, academic arguments, ideological arguments, philosophical arguments, can be far more dangerous. And that's what we need to know. So it's yet one of the lessons that we're learning from these battles that we're seeing today. The battles between right and wrong, and how to look at academia. It has its place, but the brain sometimes is overrated. Besides the brain, there's also a heart. There's empathy, there's feelings. And that's what needs to be introduced. And I say this to all my academic colleagues and friends. Yes, understands its role, just like we understand the role of computers. You're not going to ask a computer what's right and what's wrong. May we be wise, the true wisdom, the wisdom of life, the wisdom of a mother and father who know, a healthy mother and father who know what's good or not good for their children. They don't need a scientist to give them a formula for it. There's a certain gut, visceral sense. May we be able to learn that and teach it to others, and not allow our minds and politics and biases cloud those lines between truth and lies, between fact and fiction, between myth and reality, and between good and evil. May we be blessed with that clarity, and perhaps times like this, actually, the blessing is the clarity. You see who's who. When times are calmer, you don't always know where someone stands. But as Warren Buffett says, when the tide is out, you know who's been swimming naked. So maybe this exposes the nakedness of different people and what they say and what they believe. May we only see beautiful times for all people on this earth, peace, personal and global redemption.